What is up, and I welcome each and every one of you back to a brand new Civ 6 or Civilization 6 video. It has been a long time coming, and today we're going to take a deep dive on how good is Civ 6 really. It's more of a Civ 6 review type of thing, not exactly a Civ 6 guide or a playthrough, but considering my channel is based around this game, I think it would be good to do an unbiased review of what's good about it, what's bad about it, and then give it a sort of aggregate score at the end. Think of the Humankind review I did a month ago or two when it first came out, but instead I'm doing it for Civ, and I'm going to probably mark it a lot harder because it has been out for years now, since 2016, and 5 years, wow, and it's already got 2 DLCs, a new Frontier Pass, and pretty much is in a finished state, I think. I don't think there's going to be any more additions, but if there is, I guess I'll remake this video or eat the words in my mouth or something. But yeah, before we start, if you do enjoy, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and without further ado, let's get into what is Civ 6 exactly. Now, asking my channel what is Civ 6 exactly is just like asking them what is water, what is oxygen, what is food. It is pretty obvious what this game is, let's be real. If you've watched my channel for any amount of time, my name is literally the Civ Lifer, so yet if you're watching my channel, you know what this game is. But for the people who don't, it's a 4X strategy game by Firaxis. 4X stands for expand, exploit, explore, and exterminate. Ooh, Twitter's not gonna like that one. But essentially what this game is, it's you're building your empire from the ground up. Obviously, you're building a civilization through the ages with immortal leaders. As always, they just go from like 4000 BC to 2000 AD without once dying or anything like that, and probably most weird of all, a nuke happy Gandhi. So essentially this game is you building your civilization from the beginning of time. It's really the only game that's kind of like this. The games that come close to it are Humankind, but that's a really new game, just came out a month ago, and you obviously have Paradox games, which are kind of the same, except they're really set more towards a specific time period. But aside from that, there's really no other game that really does anything as close as Civilization 6 does, aside from previous Civilization games. So, yeah, it's definitely a unique type of game, making it very hard to actually, say which is what, how good it is, because there's not really a lot of comparisons. The only comparison is a previous generation of the game, or a game that came out a little while ago. But, essentially, I'm going to try to do my best with all the information we have, and essentially that is pretty much what Civ 6 is. Now, how will I be ranking this game? We just talked about how it's absolutely impossible for me to give a fair ranking because there really isn't any other game like it. For example, when the first video game came out and it was just two, paddles just swinging a ball back and forth, it was the greatest game of all time up to that point, because there was no other previous game, of course. But I'm going to be ranking them. I have really only one option. I have to compare them to Civilization 5 and Humankind. I know it's not exactly the best comparison, considering one's a previous generation and the other is sort of a new game that literally doesn't have one expansion pass, but I think this is the best way to sort of rank them right now. I'll be focusing more on the Civ 5 side of aspects, because I guess we could look at sort of the improvement, considering that A, Civ 5 is still one of the best strategy games of all time, and 2, the fact that I actually started with Civ 5, so there is a little nostalgia there, which should negate any bias I have towards Civ 6. So without further ado, let's get started with the comparisons. Now, Civilization 5 and 6 both have the same essential end goals, except for one. There's a science, culture, domination, and diplomatic victory in both, which are essentially the same exact victory types. Culture, after Brave New World, is just getting tourists and influence points and stuff like that. Science is making it into space, although Civ 6 focuses more on the different steps, whereas Civ 5 focuses on spaceship parts. Domination is just eliminating all the other Civs as capitals, and obviously diplomatic is winning the world leader vote at the World Congress. It's a little different between 5 and 6, but for the most part, they're the same end goals. The one difference is Civ 6 has a religious victory, where you try to convert over half the world's population to your religion, but aside from that, they have the same essential victory points, end goals, stuff like that. Next up, we got the same basic mechanics, aside from really only 2. Now, the same mechanics include the World Congress, you have combats, tech trees, you have settlers, builders, pretty much the same type of units, swordsmen, warriors. Battering rams and siege towers, along with drones, are kind of different, but when it comes to just pure unit trees and tech trees and stuff like that, they are essentially the same exact game. The other really big comparison I'm going to give is that there's sort of the same movement speed and the same 4x mechanics. Like we said, the 4x stands for explore, exploit, exterminate, and expand, and essentially Civ 5 does this just as similarly as Civ 6. Obviously you have humankind, but you got units with like 8 movement speed in that game. In this game, there's a lot more emphasis on just exploring slowly and inch by inch, while exploiting resources and exterminating other people are essentially the same exact mechanics. So for all intents and purposes, the basic foundation mechanics of Civ 5 are very similar to Civ 6. There's also a hexagonal system, and it's just pretty much the same base mechanics. What can I say? Now for the differences. Despite how these similar games might be on the surface, inside they're like a moody teenage boy because you're different from me and I'm completely my own person and nobody gets me, so on and so forth. So the differences from Civ 5 are we have now a civic tree. The civic tree is essentially the tech tree for culture. All the cultural wonders and religious buildings and stuff like that have moved into the civic tree aside from astrology first, and this does also allow you to go get governments to go ahead and focus more on the cultural aspect of the game, stuff like that. Cavalry has a niche in Civ 6 as well. Civ 5, knights, horsemen, all sorts of cavalry until about tanks are absolutely useless. I mean, holy crap. I've never seen anyone use knights unironically in Civ 5. They are so bad because they have a negative 66 combat strength against cities. Absolutely insane. The other thing, speaking of cities, is that in Civ 5, cities were a lot harder to take, even more harder than walls in Civ 6, because if you have walls, just get a battering ram or a catapult, boom, tear those walls down. In Civ 5, you needed to have those guys because archers and crossbowmen, while you needed about 6 of them, along with 2 melee units to comfortably take a city in Civilization 5. In Civ 6, you could probably do it with 2 or 3 swordsmen like I normally do, and fail at a lot of the time because I have almost no units. But the cities in Civ 5 were a lot harder to take, but Civ 6 emphasizes more on expansive and a larger amount of cities versus Civ 5's 4 or 5 cities, turtle, and win the game type of thing. The other thing we can't talk about with differences is the removal of the happiness mechanic, which also sort of coincides with the fact that the Civ 6 is meant to be a lot more expansive and emphasize more on the expand portion of the genre, whereas Civ 5 really focused on the explore portion of it. But when it comes to removal of happiness, it does prevent you it prevents the preventing from stopping you from getting cities. I hope I said that right. Probably not. But essentially, if you got into negative happiness in Civ 5, the world essentially was over. The apocalypse had begun. It's just absolute terrible. You get to -1 happiness, your cities start growing, your people start being unrestful, production stops happening, and it's the worst possible position you could ever be in. Civ 6 has the amenity system, which is on a per city basis, which is a lot better. It's sort of like removing global happiness but keeping the local happiness. And if you have one city that has like -1 or -2 amenities, that's really a 10% decrease to all yields aside from even food, actually, which is, it's bad, but it's not as game-breaking as Civ 5 was. All this is meant to be a sort of more expansive and wide type of playstyle where you need a lot of cities, 7 and 8 at least, in order to really do anything in the game. The other two big differences are, number one, dispersed cities. Instead of building everything in the same city in Civ 5, Civ 6 lets you build the specific buildings in districts. You can only have a specific amount of districts. So, for example, you can't build the library and all the art buildings in one city unless you have both the theater square and the campus district. Civ 5, they were just buildings, no such things as district, no adjacencies or anything like that. This is probably one of Civ 6's better investments because when it comes to districts, it does sort of emphasize you to focus a little more on placement and strategy. We'll get into that in the good and great section later on, but the final thing we do want to talk about is the art style. At the beginning, a lot of people absolutely despise the Civ 6 art style, too cartoony, too casual. I personally didn't like it either. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh, I loved it from the beginning. I was here when it was all down and bad and so. No, I wasn't. I didn't like the art style either, but it does sort of grow on you towards the end, especially considering that animated you can do a lot more with than sort of the realistic art style Civ 5 has. Now, I'm hoping Civ 7 If I had to assume, I'd say it would be another more cartoony type game because, again, number one, this is more of a casual game a lot of the time for most people, and number two, honestly, the art style really pops out and gives this game a lot more life than, for example, Civ 5 does. Civ 5 looks a little bit bland in comparison, and again, while while a lot of people, a lot of the hardcore people probably do want the old art style back, including me personally, I do understand why they changed it to this sort of cartoony-ish look, and I'm not going to put it as a bad or a good in the good and bad section later on, because it really does depend on your own preference. But yeah, that's essentially all the differences we have. Let's go ahead and talk about how humankind factors into the equation. What is up, everybody? It is sponsor time. I have actually collabed with Strategy Gamer, link down below in the description or the pinned comment. This is going to be the link. You click on it, you come to Redbubble, and you see all these beautiful Eureka t-shirts. You'll be helping out the channel tremendously. Just go ahead, browse, buy anything if it is within your means. And if you don't want any t-shirts, click on his name right here. He has both XCOM and Eureka Civ 6 style t-shirt stickers, and you click shop all products. This dude has got everything. He's got hats, mouse pads, desk mats, everything you need. You can get a tank top. I mean, come on. You're gonna shirt. I already have a shirt, by the way. The one I got was actually the premium t-shirt. I do really enjoy this. And you're gonna get laptop skins, sleeves, iPhone skins, everything you could possibly need. So go ahead, link in the description, check it out. You'll be supporting the channel, and without further ado, let's get right back into the video. Humankind is the new kid on the block. If we're being completely objectively honest, it doesn't hold a candle to Civ 6 yet, because, well, it just came out, number one. Number two, there's a lot of balance issues. And number three, there's not a lot to the game because, well, there's not a lot of expansions as well. It's definitely a really fun game to try out right now, but this is a review for Civ 6. Why am I going through Humankind? But yeah, try it out. Once the expansions come out, I'm expecting it to be at least a little better than Civ 5 or Civ 6, or at the very least, the exact same. But yeah, let's do some comparisons because this is really the only other 4X game that's really worth talking about. The comparisons to HK are dispersed cities and the same basic unit and tech trees for the most part. It still has a tech tree, and for the most part, it does sort of unlock things around the same amount of time that Civ 6's tech tree does, and the same basic unit types, warriors into swordsmen, into riflemen, into stuff like that, and archers into crossbowmen, and catapults, trebuchets, all that good stuff. But the other big thing is dispersed cities. In Humankind, you build wonders outside of your cities. There are some buildings you build inside, like the granary, animal barns, and stuff like that. But a lot of the time when it comes to the holy sites and it comes to the wonders, your cities are going to be dispersed. It's sort of more of a mix between 5 and 6 because a lot of buildings you can build in your city center, but then you also have to think about districts. There's an industrial district, there's a food district, a money district, a science district eventually, forts, fortifications, giving you extra stability, all that good stuff. So it is sort of a mix for the most part, aside from the 4 basic resources in Humankind: food, gold, money, production, and science. Everything is going to be built in the city, but it is sort of expansive enough in order for it to be kind of classified as a dispersed city structure. That's essentially the only comparisons we really have for Humankind. Let's get into the differences. Number one is the combat. Humankind sort of has a sort of separate battlefield, think Total War style 4X game, and you really have armies that could join, reinforce into the battlefield, whereas in Civ 6, everything is done in real time on the map. Number two, we have the amenities versus stability. Now, amenities and stability sort of serve the same purpose, preventing you from growing as far as possible. In Humankind, it prevents you from building too many districts, because there's not a limit to how many districts you can build, and if there wasn't stability, you could just spam out industrial districts. I know they're not called industrial districts, they're called Maker's Quarters. It's just easier for me. But in Civilization 6, the amenities sort of prevent you from expanding wider. In Humankind, there's sort of a each region can only hold one city type of thing that prevents you from expanding really wide, whereas in Civ 6, it's the amenities that prevent you from expanding wide. Too many amenities means you're not going to have as productive cities, so there's obviously still a sweet spot, and you do have to worry about amenities a lot of the time. So, yeah, amenities and stability sort of serve the same purpose, except for different things. The religious game is completely different as well. When it comes to Humankind religiously, it's sort of just like passive expansion. There's no missionaries or apostles. You try to get the holy sites and try to get extra tenets in your religion, whereas in Civilization 6, you are trying to spread your religion with missionaries, apostles, to get more bonuses and to get more religious pressure and to win a game if you are going for a religious victory. Finally, the final difference, and the biggest one in my opinion, is the victory criteria. The victory in Humankind all comes down to score victory. It's like score victory in Civilization 6, except not really, if that does make any sense. You get points for doing era score, and at the end of the game, there are a number of ways to win the game. A, make the planet uninhabitable. B, blast through the tech tree and launch a Mars colony. Or C, just wait until the turn timer ends. But it doesn't matter if, for example, everyone's in the ancient era and you're in like the last era and you won the game through a space race. You didn't win. You didn't win, because even if you got to the end and someone has a higher score than you, that person is going to be the victor of the map. Whereas Civilization 6, whoever gets to their preferred victory type first wins. For example, like science, culture, diplomatic. If you're like not really that, if you have one dude snowballing out of control, but yet you're somehow sitting there and win a surprise diplomatic victory after building the Statue of Liberty, you still win that game, which definitely provides a lot more avenues and a lot more civilizations can be effective in this sort of system. That's not a problem for Humankind, because the last big difference we have is the fact that instead of building a civilization and having a specific leader throughout the beginning of time towards the end, you do instead have different cultures that you can change each era, mix and match them. For example, you could have the English one era, and then you could have the Germans in the next, and finally the Turks in the last era. Does that make too much sense in the grand scheme of things? About as much sense as it makes for goddamn Alexander the Great to survive 8,000 years before dying. Holy crap. But yeah, that's pretty much the biggest differences between HK. Let's go ahead and move on to the good and the bad, the great and the terrible, before giving my final verdict for Civilization 6. Now we talk about the good stuff. What does this game do right? Well, number one, we're going to be talking about exactly what criteria I'm going to be using. I'm mainly going to be comparing this to Civ, aside from Civ 5, aside from a key number of different points. Obviously that's probably the best comparison we have at this stage, unless there's some sort of super secret 4X game that's popular and I have no idea about. But essentially, the first good thing about it is the amenity system. Way, way better than the happiness system. Civ 5 prevented you from really doing anything wide because of that, but in Civ 6, the amenity system allows you to focus on happiness for each city, and if one city's feeling a little too rowdy and revolutionary and I guess we'll call it communist, you aren't going to have like a rebellion in your entire empire. You're just going to be in that one city. Next up, we have the addition of the civic tree. I do think it's a lot better than social policies. Social policies were nice in Civ 5, and you do kind of miss them, but they were sort of replaced by governments, and the civic tree does allow people, for example, like think Brazil in Civ 5. He was a culture civ, but in order for you to win a culture victory, you had to get super far ahead in science because there's only a tech tree, and you need to unlock the culture wonders, and the culture wonders are in the tech tree. So essentially, it's a science game until you get the wonders to make it a culture game. But yeah, with the addition of the civic tree, you could just go ahead and pick some civs and focus wholly on culture without having to worry too much about science. Next up, we have governments. Governments, in my opinion, were a lot better. Ideology was good in Civ 5. Think ideology, but a little less expansive, and instead spread throughout the entire game in the form of different governments, each with their own unique sets of abilities. Merchant Republic gives you money, Theocracy gives you faith, Oligarchy allows you to wipe out your nearby neighbors and exterminate them, breaking every single clause in the Geneva Suggestion, and finally you have the late game ideologies, the no-no German ideology, the no-no Soviet ideology, and obviously you have democracy, which I think I can say online. But aside from that, the governments, in all honesty, jokes aside, were a really good addition, allowing you to customize your match depending on how the game is going. Are you wanting to go expansive and build settlers? You could put in colonization. If you want to go in militarily and begin preparing for a war, you could add in the agogay, I think it's called. I call it a gauche, but it's apparently spelled agogay. And then prepare for war that way. But I do like the variety governments gives, and speaking of variety, let's talk about the variety of victory types. You have so many different paths to go down to that it really does not matter what your civ is good or isn't good at. If you go for one victory type, you're not going to be penalized, I guess, for not going through a different victory type. You can focus all in one thing. You can make different strategies. For example, Russia has an amazing faith civ, but you can also use their unique abilities to go down the culture path and almost neglect faith for the most part. Or you could use their ability to get the Lavra to get something like cross-culture dialogue and use that to get a space race victory. There are a lot of different bonuses you can get with that civilization, and the variety of victory types does allow for a variety of strategies, making this game almost infinitely replayable. Speaking of variety, the wide array of leaders we have is also a really big bonus. There's about 50 different leaders. Each one is super different from the last. Is Germany really similar to somebody like the Dutch? Well, they are similar to the Dutch, actually. Are they similar to someone like Victoria, for example? Not really, quite honestly. And having different leaders does mean that you will have a different game each and every time, not only with the civ you're playing, but the civs you're going up against. For example, maybe you would declare war on someone like Wilhelmina versus if somebody like, I don't know, if you started near somebody like Montezuma or something. Whereas if you start near somebody like Korea, you would think, okay, I have to make sure they don't spawn too far ahead in science, and therefore the strategies you're thinking of are completely different on a game-by-game basis, depending on who you are, what your start position is, who starts near you, who killed your dog, who are we going to John Wick, you know, that kind of stuff. But the wide array of leaders is definitely nice, and the also good I'm going to give them is governors, which is super different from Civ 5. They didn't have anything like that. The governors do allow you to go ahead and customize your playstyle based on which governors you choose. I do recommend the Governors Reformed mod that I use, because in the regular Governors mod, the one gripe I have is it's always Pingala and always Magnus, because Pingala gives science culture, boom, what else do you need? And Magnus lets you get production, food, and build cities super fast without sacrificing population, putting all the other governors in sort of a niche type of role. But the Governors Reformed mod does allow you to specify your playstyle based on each governor. Each one is good, really good at a specific thing, and instead of just going Pingala and Magnus, there are different opportunities depending on what game you are playing, which again allows you to just customize your playstyle towards whatever the hell you do want to play. Finally, the thing I'm going to talk about now is no civ is that severely overpowered. I know we all make jokes about Babylon and getting fighters in the ancient era, but for the most part, if I told you to win even a victory with Georgia, right? No civ is too specifically over or underpowered. Obviously, comparatively, there's going to be a ranking system. I did do a tier list, but really the abilities of each civ are sort of a minor thing of what goes into every single game, making sort of the differences not as big as they would be. If you get into a terrible start as Germany, that's a lot of the times worse than getting into an incredible start as somebody like Georgia or somebody like Eleanor of England, for example, who's a lot better than you would think, actually. But yeah, honestly, no civ is so underwhelming that, you know, if you're playing someone like, I don't know, Georgia, and you spawn near Babylon, you're not thinking to yourself, game's over, I have no chance, you might as well forfeit. You still do have a really good chance, and with enough strategy and making use of your abilities, you can actually end up winning that game 9 times out of 10. Finally, the final good thing I'm going to give them is it literally works on anything. The game works on everything. You might as well call these guys Bethesda Studio, because they have released this game on every single console imaginable. Not only that, but it even works on a silly little crop duster from the 1990s. You can take the first computer ever made, ever dreamed of. The Greek philosophers dreamed of this computer, and civilization could probably run on that computer. This game does not take a lot of specs to run on. Aside from the minor crashes we do have a lot of the time, when it comes to actually running the game, it is a lot better and smoother than a lot of other games that we do have. So that's pretty much the good. Let's go ahead and talk about the bad. There's a couple of things to talk about bad. It's not as extensive as the good list, but the bad list still has a couple of different things. The first one I'm going to give is sort of, I called it combat question mark. The reason it's combat question mark and not specifically combat is because Civilization 6 is not bad when it comes to combat, right? I really do like the combat in the game, but it's sort of like having good combat versus in Humankind, which has absolutely stellar, perfect combat, in my opinion. opinion. Humankind's combat system is so much better. There's so much more strategy involved. Instead of being on like the entire world map, you have two armies going at it one-on-one in pitched battles, which is, in my opinion, a lot more accurate and a lot better and a lot more strategic than Civilization 6 has. I'm not going to talk too much about this because it isn't essentially that bad, especially when compared to Civ 5, but when compared to something like Humankind, it just blows this game out of the water combat-wise. The first bad thing we're really going to talk about is crashes, though. Crashes happen a lot ever since the April update. The game always crashes 1 to 2 times every playthrough, and I'm talking about full crash. The entire game closes on you, and you have to restart from the beginning. I was doing the Ultimate Civ 6 Deity Challenge, which we're going to do the Basil part tomorrow. Definitely check it out, in which essentially I have to do an A to Z challenge on stream, no rerolls, no restarts, and I can't lose. I have to go 52-0. It's real fun. Come check it out tomorrow on stream on this channel or twitch.tv/CivLifer1. But when I did Vietnam the other day, I think I crashed like 3 or 4 different times during that 2 or 3 hour campaign, which definitely does sort of stop your flow a little bit and takes a while to restart the game. But aside from that, you know, crashes are just in general not good for everyone, and it did start happening really after the April update they did. So I'm hoping they do some sort of patch or something in order for them to fix this, but it's not too game breaking, which is why I have it in bad and not terrible. Next up, we're going to talk about the first game system. I don't like how they do roads in this game. In Civ 5, it was easy because workers don't die, so you could essentially do a road to here, or make your own specific roads, honestly. But aside from that, when it comes to Civ 6, the only way you build roads is through trading posts and trade routes. And considering the fact that you really don't have too many trade routes early game, you have to sort of pick and choose exactly which road you're going to, and whether you want to pick between building a road to this city, or getting more yields because you want to go to a trading post to this city. So it is kind of not as good, and don't even get me started on railroads. Oh my god, railroads are terrible. You got to get a military engineer, and you got to use that guy to build it. Who builds military engineers? Genuinely. Let me know in the comments if any of you have ever built a military engineer. I think I might have built one to get a missile silo like months ago, and I couldn't even get the missile silo because I don't even know how to. Military engineers are just so obscure. And again, roads and railroads really aren't that big of a part in this game. Pretty bad, honestly. Badly implemented if we're being completely objective. The other bad thing we have is tall is not viable in this game. It's sort of the inverse problem in Civ 5. Civ 5, tall was the only way to play. Wide was, you know, you'd have to be good to make it viable. Whereas in this game, it doesn't matter how good you are. If you settle 4 cities and decide to turtle up, you're not winning the higher difficulties. It's just that simple. I don't care who you are. If you build 4 cities and you win the game, you might as well just go buy a lottery ticket at that point, because that's how lucky you are. But it's just not that viable. I might try a challenge to try to win a Civ 5 style tall game, but the way districts work and the way different stuff like that work, you need more cities, and there's less penalties for having more cities, unlike Civ 5. So essentially, you could just build as many cities as you want, and the more cities you have, the better it is. So again, tall's not very viable. The next thing we're going to talk about is naval combat is too easy. The AI is just so stupid in general, but when it comes to naval combat, they can't even muster up the combined 3 brain cells to have to go ahead and do something competent navally. It just doesn't make sense. It's because the water's so wide and massive, and they have so much movement speed, that it's so easy for you to just pick them apart and sort of surround them and destroy the specific naval boats. Not only that, but a lot of the times, at the very least in melee combat, the military units would be sort of in a sort of pitched area, because, you know, if you declare war on someone, there's only a specific area where you'll really see combat. Your territory, the territory between you guys, or the territory in the guy you're attacking. So, I mean, the AI is terrible at naval combat. Again, it's one of those things where we have to wait until they finally get some sort of smarter decision-making AI in order for us to sort of begin, hopefully, having a chance to have fun in naval combat. But next up, we're just going to talk about this one simple. The AI is just dumb in general. It's not too much of a gripe because every 4X game has stupid AI in general. Every Paradox game has stupid AI in general. It's just the way the game works. It's just like we're not that technologically advanced yet as a society, and the day society gets this advanced, I mean, goddamn, if everyone subscribed to the Civ Lifer, we'd get there within months. Trust me, we'd get super competent AI. Subscribe, by the way. But in all honesty, the AI is just dumb. Not really too big of a gripe, but yeah, I just wanted to get that off my chest. fast. Next up, the final bad thing is it's rock bands or bust for a culture victory. Culture victories are so fun, said nobody ever. Early game and setting up everything is kind of fun, and getting all the tourism buffs you need is super fun, but aside from that, it will take you a long time, especially on the higher difficulties, to win a culture victory. In all actuality, you're going to want rock bands, and you're going to want 2 or 3 of those guys to survive to their last promotion and give you insane amounts of tourism. That's really how you win in this game, and I mean, just aside from that, I don't like it how there's only sort of one way to win a culture victory. Kind of, I mean, it's just not that good. But that was essentially the bad. Let's go and talk about the great of the game. Now, the game has a couple of great mechanics. Number one, game modes can be chosen or unchosen, depending on how you like Secret Societies or Heroes and Legends. You can either choose them or unchoose them if you feel they're too easy or too hard, which is definitely good and allows you to customize your campaign a lot. Not to mention, you can also pick what city-states you want, what civilizations you want. I do like the customization examples in this game. Number two, we have multiple strategies towards the same goal, giving you insane replayability. You could go ahead and go cross-culture dialogue strat for a science victory, or get super great campuses, or conquer your 2 nearest neighbor and then turtle up with all the cities you have, or go ahead and not really focus too much on science, but focus culture and city-states, and then get the policy late game, which gives you a 5% boost to each city-state you're suzerain of, or get Kilwa Kanasawa. There's a lot of different ways to get to a victory type, so it does allow you to have infinite strategies, essentially, with different specific civs. The next great thing about the game is that the maps are always incredible. For the most part, the maps are so different each and every time, but they also make sense, right? It's just sort of like a continent. There's some deserts nearby, there's tundra, there's snow, there's jungles, there's plains and grasslands, that each map being so specific, it's sort of like Minecraft in a way, right? Each Minecraft map is so different, but at the same time, you've never gotten into a map and like overall, not just your start position, I'm talking about the map, and said, this map absolutely sucks bull testicles. You never actually say that. The maps are always really well made for the most part. Next up, cities need a lot more planning, which does give you a lot of strategy. You have to place down districts. You have to choose which districts you need and which ones you're going to forego. You have to make a decision like, okay, this is my victory type. What do I want? What am I going for? And that does give you a lot of different options, number one. And number two, sort of makes you think a lot harder than you normally would. Finally, we are going to talk about the cores and armies, helps the late game domination slog. Civ 5, if you were going for a domination victory and you somehow made it through the -50 unhappiness and the communist revolt that eventually happened in your cities because Russia was nearby and they decided, your people decided actually, I like these guys' culture a lot more, switch or we're going to give you a -50 happiness debuff. Cores and armies help the late game slog. I completely forgot what I was going to say. But in the Civ 5, you had so many units that moving them and positioning them took so long. With the way cores and armies work this game, you need less units. And therefore, if you combine units, you're going to get the promotions combined into the same unit. So you would be able to make do with a lot less units and still win a domination victory, which helps with the late game slog. And I think is a great addition to the game when people do use them. Cores and armies are super effective. That's all I have for great. Let's move on to terrible. The terrible of this game are essentially 4 main points. Ideology system is gone. I really hate that. I love the way how you could exactly use your social policies in Civ 5 to pick your tenets for ideology, which definitely seemed to help out a lot in the grand scheme of things, I would say. Ideologies were super fun once you got them, but it's sort of like the ideology system was built back but expanded wider, if that makes sense. So it's not as intensive. You don't have like infinite possibilities from powerful policies to choose from. Instead, you sort of have a little less powerful ones, but they go on throughout the entire game. Number 2, in terrible, the late game slog is exactly what I typed into my phone. But the late game slog is absolutely abhorrent in this game, especially when you're going for a culture victory. Like I said, domination isn't too bad with the cores and army systems, and you have plains late game. Religion isn't that bad either, because after you get a few civilizations, you are going to have more than enough faith, hopefully, to convert the rest. Science is pretty bad once you know you're going to win, but you have to wait till you get to the next technology or finish the next spaceship part. But the worst of of them all is going to be culture victory, because culture victory sort of depends on what the enemy civs do as much as you, because if they focus completely on culture and they have like 800 domestic tourists, you're not winning that game. You're not winning that game before turn 400. But if they decide not to, then you could win easily maybe by turn 100 if you have like 7 domination civs who don't focus on culture at all. But all in all, it's just the late game slog when it comes to culture. You're just hitting next turn and hoping the RNG gives it so that your rock bands survive, but the late game slog for the most part is terrible. Next up, we're going to talk about you can't use late game units for very long. You get a boomer, you get artillery, you get a battleship. You're using them for like 5 turns because, again, the late game tree is so condensed that you're not going to be able to use them for that long. For example, crossbows are used for way longer. Swordsmen are going to be used for a lot longer as well. All these units are going to be used for a lot longer than the late game units because you're eventually easily going to be able to build the next unit and then the next unit maybe like 10, 20 turns afterwards. I think a lot of it is just there's not enough techs or there's too many units. In my opinion, if they just cut back the amount of late game units or put them in like the future era, for example, I feel like that would help out the game a lot. But finally, we're going to talk about the snowball is worse than ever. Snowballing is essentially, think of taking a small snowball and rolling it down a hill. It's going to just continue getting momentum, speed as it continues growing because the snow is going to attach to the snowball, just going to get bigger and bigger. So while it was going slowly at the beginning, it speeds up dramatically. It may even become fatal actually towards the ending. So essentially what this is, maybe it takes a while for you to take out your first civilization, maybe a little easier to take out your second civilization, and then by the time you're attacking the third civilization, you're so far ahead and have so many units, so many well-promoted units that you are going to be able to destroy them, which is the snowball mechanic, essentially. You're going to be able to kill people a lot faster than usual. So what I'm trying to say is snowball is so much worse because in Civ 5 there was a happiness mechanic, and if somebody did sort of like take out 2 or 3 civs, they'd have to deal with happiness number 1, and they'd have to deal with massive debuffs because in Civ 5 you had massive debuffs for conquering different cities and different civilizations. Every city you have is like a big debuff towards science. It makes techs a lot more expensive, whereas the optimal strategy was building 4 or 5 and just building up your cities to ensure the best sort of mathematical, playing Civ mathematically, essentially. But the snowball is so much worse because they sort of removed that mechanic in Civ 6. And with the fact that each city allows you to build science districts and get you a lot more science, if you do kill 3 or 4 civs or the enemy AI does, it's game over. The snowball is too hard. You're not going to catch up unless you yourself have taken out that large amount of civs. But essentially, the snowball is worse than ever. That's all I have to say for the terrible, honestly. Let's continue to what the game could still use in the final verdict. Now, the game could still use a number of things. Number 1, you could use more interactivity with science and culture. Think cores and armies for domination to make it so that it's a lot more fun, interactive, and less of a slog when you're going for a culture and science victory. Number 2, we could have a sort of osmosis mechanic. If your nearby civ has discovered a technology, make it so that it's 20% cheaper, so that we sort of have people on the same playing field, and it isn't going to be Shaka has taken out 2 neighboring civilizations and used that science to get the information era and is now attacking me with bombers and giant death robots while I still have knights. Please send help. XOXO, the Civ lifer. But aside from that, the osmosis mechanic would allow you to sort of, maybe per era they're ahead, you get a 20% debuff to, or 20% cost reduction to each technology you're researching, which could be nice. Next up, we want a patch to fix crashes, right? The crashes are just terrible. Please patch it to fix it. The next thing we're going to talk about is a patch to fix crashes. Please fix the crashes. They're absolutely terrible. Next up, we're going to talk about, please God, just fix the goddamn crashes. That's all I'm asking for. But we'll get into a real, okay, joke's over. The final thing we're talking about is another update to fix its mistakes. Think of something like the Brave New World expansion when they added trade routes and a culture victory revamp. It made culture victory a lot better in Civ 5, and if they could do sort of the same thing in Civ 6, fixing all the mistakes I did talk about, I guess they're sort of subjective, but maybe fixing the biggest mistakes in Civ 6, fixing the biggest problems with it would make this a lot better. That's kind of what the game could still use. Let's go to the final verdict. Now, I have been critical of this game, obviously, because I've played it for a long time. I have a couple thousand hours on it, and And honestly, despite the fact I'm sounding a lot critical, talking about the bad and the terrible, I'm just trying to be objective towards both sides. For the final verdict, it's a lot better than Civ 5, is everything combined, everything all together. And when Civ 6 released, it was definitely worse than a complete Civ 5 experience. Shut up, phone, I'm not done yet. But in Civ 6, we can all agree, I think for the most part, that objectively, it is, at the end of the day, a lot better than Civilization 5, which you would expect from a expansion. It's also better than Humankind up to now, because Humankind is still a new game, so I guess this isn't anything too crazy or too, oh my god, how could you say that, and Twitter rant and stuff like that. But it's better than Civ 5 and Humankind, I think, no doubt about it. Overall, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I personally would give this game 9.5 to 9.8 out of 10, but I decided to take 0.5 to 0.8 off because, again, it might be just my bias speaking, and 9.0 still sort of captures the idea I'm trying to say. This is a really amazing game. It's so replayable, so much fun, and no two games are the same. Not only that, but it also has a sort of difficulty curve where when you finally get good at the game, you finally see your results, it definitely gets addicting. There's a reason one more turn is the slogan for the game. So again, overall, 9.0. Personally, me, I'd give it a 9.5 at the end of the day, but again, that might just be bias speaking. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, if you did, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe. We're going to be streaming Far Cry 6 later at 5, and I'm going to be releasing the Spain video at 2 later today. Finally, we are going to finish the Aztec and Eleanor series on Sunday's stream, so I'm not forgetting about those games. I'll stream them and then keep them on the main channel for sure. Yeah, without further ado, I will see you all in the next video. Peace. Huge shout out to Cash Christian, Ben Omby, John Blair, Jackson Perez, Adam Mestre, Empyreum, Polska Bob, Jeff Yutzler, Kim Cosmos, and a giant shout out over to Overflow of Amenities, Robert, Polaris Gaming, JH, and Mick James.